All right. Welcome back. Hello, David.
Oh, Gregor, this time you're doing the intro. I love it.
Yeah, we're changing traditions, innovations happening, life here. So we thought I'd start because I had this topic on my mind, and it got sparked as usual in my life by conversations with people and clients, and also it comes in time with the offering a new webinar on polarities or the love of polarities. And I want to share with my thinking that got sparked from these conversations, which is um, noticing when we put out the webinar, which is called the love of
Art,
polarities, I think.
art of polarity, we said.
The art of polarities, right? So we were tinkering with different titles, but all are in the corner of like, yeah, two polarities. We noticed in conversations that polarities to some degree already have a bad reputation by now in the world. And I think a lot of it comes in the more mainstream society because we equate it with polarization, where we just feel extremely opposite. One camp feels really opposite to another camp politically, from different worldviews, whatever, where there's like a irreconcilable spasm, like a schism between people or worldviews.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is also polarization or polarity. Sometimes got a not so good name in the whole gender debate, and feeling like the models of masculine and feminine or man and women are kind of like outdated models.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to out myself, and this came more clear for me in the last few years, really. Um, Maybe because I'm becoming an old, obviously already white male, um, that I'm actually a lover of polarities, or the concept of a dialectical approach to life. And for me, there is a very deep importance in there, and that I see if we don't individually and collectively as a society, as humanity right now, if we don't hold a conscious way of thinking about this dual nature of life and how we deal with opposites, we're actually um, running into some significant traps or dangers, I would say, that at first might not be apparent, but they are quite, I think, important. And so I had this conversation with a new client, a relatively young man, just became a father and is now a young as a family, and had been in the tech entrepreneurial world for a long time and kind of became successful. And he shared that for a long time, his sole orientation in life, or North Star or guiding principle, was freedom. Like that's he was doing everything in order to have more of that which he called freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And what was really interesting, he already noticed some things are not working so well in his life anymore now, specifically by now having a family, and also by becoming older and questioning things in new ways. And then in the conversation, it became quite clear, or I also reflected that back to him, that this is something that very often happens if we have a, let's say, unexamined, one-dimensional approach to life. We will always meet its opposite in some way, shape, or form in life.
Yes.
And I find this super interesting because that's really what a lot of wisdom traditions have been trying to teach, what some spiritual traditions like Taoism very much made actually a central tenet or cornerstone of their teaching. And it appears also in many philosophies and schools of thought. But I very often see people having a very different way of trying to make life work, where there's an idea, if I just do the one thing, or I find the one thing,
Yeah.
and that's the quality I kind of like put, I that's the chariot unto which I pull all my horses, and I just do that one thing, and then life will somehow turn out the right way. And this, I would describe that as a very naive, or in some way immature approach to life, because we don't take into account the complexities and the dual nature, or the dialectical way of life works. And I mean, I know, like, with all kind of approaches to life, and we have talked about that also, about the beauty and the great benefits of a trauma-informed culture, for example, where you put safety,
Mhm.
for example, or the embrace of sensitivity, a lot into front and center of your approach. And the interesting thing is that this gives a lot of new potential and possibility for healing and integration. But if that becomes, again, your own one and only orientation to how you meet yourself, people, processes, if you work with people, whatever, it often turns out that at one point you don't feel more safe. Actually, you might even feel more threatened, because now you don't develop the counterforce of also meeting the inevitable challenges of life with the kind of resilience that is needed to go through life. Or and so I find that super important to kind of rescue the word polarity, or the
Mm.
duality of life,
Yes.
and developing a more conscious approach. Because if we don't do it, it will come, as I said before, and bite us in our ass in an unconscious way, and we didn't expect it. So why not develop a more mature and conscious approach to it from the beginning, and knowing that there is always a certain dynamic interplay
Mhm.
of opposing or antagonistic forces, but that's not a problem to be solved. That's life to be embraced.
Yes.
And yeah, where opposites are not um, enemies, but opposites are creational forces that
Yeah.
actually make life really, really rich and interesting.
Yes. Cool. Can I just share some thoughts that came up while you were speaking?
Absolutely, bring it in.
Right. So, yeah, I felt like putting what you said in the beginning about the polarity having a bad reputation into different words that might resonate more with some people. I think some ways that I've also experienced this in my own life is that instead of having this view of all sides of some spectrum have inherent value, that there is kind of like a no, this is the right thing. So for example, for me politically for a long time, I was like, well, being left wing is the right thing. This is it. And automatically with that, everything else is wrong. And I think that's one thing that we're seeing a lot in this world and on so many different levels is like this. I don't know, to me it feels almost like a collapse of consciousness, or just a consciousness that has not yet expanded enough to see the things that you're describing. And I can really relate to the sense of like, I don't know, almost like being confused that you can look at it differently, because once you expand and you're not super triggered in those moments, it's harder. But then it's like, it's hard not to see how force and counterforce always come together. And so what we see in this world is, yeah, there's like in culture wars, there's different people believing in different things. Like this is the right thing, and anything that believes something else is the enemy. And then there's a kind of clash of opposites, but it's not there's no space yet for synthesis for both sides to see like, oh, the other side actually has value as well. And on the like gender side, one thing that I wrote down was rigidity. Like if we talk about polarities that one can assume, and sometimes it's also being presented in a way where it's like this, it's not a dynamic thing, but it's like, this is how it is, this is how a woman is supposed to be, this is how a man is supposed to be. And there I really understand the resistance to that, in the sense of like, it doesn't feel alive. There's so much more movement that could happen if we were to let go to some degree of this rigidity. But the solution for me is not let's let go of any sense of polarity, but more like, let's find a way to look at those polarities where we see that everywhere in life there is force and counterforce, but not as like a set in stone thing, but something that constantly dynamically interacts in ourselves and between people and cultures and in nature and so on. And yeah, maybe as the last thing, or two more things actually. One is, for me, what you're describing on a consciousness level or on a spiritual level is the step into unity consciousness, into the ability to look at everything as one, and no longer separating life and my own experience into, this is how it should be and this is how it should not be. And I think this is such a crucial threshold that we're in as a humanity, that more people step into this understanding where we're able to hold those opposites as life generating forces, rather than this is right and this is wrong. And with that, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, there are places for me, and actually you mentioned it before we started recording, there are places for me where I do feel like it feels true and beneficial to have a singular orientation in my life. So for example, if I would say like, I'm really dedicated to a path of awakening, I don't know if there is a duality to awakening that I would need to include to make the picture whole. So for me, there are places where a singular orientation does make sense.
Mm. All right, which of your 5 points should I speak to first? Now you kind of like lay out the whole podcast already done now. So maybe I start at the very end, and I mean, we're always having these conversations here in a kind of spiritual dimension, a kind of psychological, therapeutical integration dimension individually, and then also kind of the societal or political spectrum at large. So we're kind of like dancing around, and I hope people or I can just trust that people that listen to us might not get totally confused by us jumping around in these different domains. So what you mentioned at the end is, I think that's super important. I would not describe the orientation as, how did you call it? Like singular. And it ties into what you said, like what's a unity consciousness? Because unity consciousness is not in denial or in discarding a sense of oppositions or dualities. Actually, it's what you said, or philosophically speaking, is there's thesis, antithesis, and there's synthesis, something that can include and transcend that space, but is not defined by it anymore, but really comfortably holds that. Yeah. The way I can hold both of my hands. I don't need to find like, so which hand am I? But very often with larger structures or difficult places in ourselves or in the society where we're not clear, oh, I'm holding two hands and I can use both and I don't need to decide. Because we have so much splits in our experiences, so much fragments, and so many places where we feel, as you said, very triggered. And then I just, or we feel very passionate or very, very concerned, or something is really close to home. And then I cannot feel, oh, I can also give some space to the other, because it would feel like losing that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have forsaken or given up something, or so we're in this win-lose dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And so the what you called singular is, what I personally like the most is a frame or a language that comes from, or it appears in different schools also, but A.H. Almaz, the kind of Sufi teacher, made it very prominent, is that the language of essence, that there are states
Mm-hmm.
that contain or have transcended already the dual nature of life, where they are, but they are containing them in a way that they're integrated, but they're not anymore bound to the dualities of life. Whereas freedom can be an essential state if I mean it from a much higher perspective. But if I take freedom as a way of like not wanting to be bound, not wanting to be limited, not wanting to just focusing on autonomy, I will definitely have to deal in my life with the forces of dependence
Yeah.
and being limited and being constrained. Sometimes life brings that nicely in through people in my intimate relationships, or in my family, or people that irritate me a lot, or I just look into life. Life will provide opportunities to see, so what are you excluding by
Mm-hmm.
just operating on the trajectory of a straight line? I just want freedom, for
Yes.
example. And so there are states, like in my life, I would say compassion, for example, is something I would orient to.
Mm-hmm.
That is not just love or empathy minus the ability to confront and to discern, but is a
Mm-hmm.
higher level of clarified love
Mm-hmm.
that one can totally aspire and orient with. But really doing that, like the word itself,
Mm.
is just the word.
Yeah.
It again counts how much I can embody that, especially in triggered states. And that's the foundation of a spiritual practice again. And so I agree, there are a lot of dimensions of life that are where I have to dance and actually get inspired by the juiciness of meeting oppositional counter forces. And then there's always a place where I can aspire to that is not bound by that anymore.
Yes.
And yeah, and then as I said, like unity consciousness is, we have to always be careful. What do we mean? What do we actually experience when we say those words?
Mm-hmm.
And whatever is excluded at one point, now in 10 years, maybe in another lifetime, if we leave that kind of way of life working itself out, will want to come home.
Mm-hmm.
Like a systemic principle that whatever is excluded in some way creates an effect. It cannot be in peace or in wholeness or in a quality of all presence. So it will have to find a way home. And maybe jumping to another element of this with polarities, I think the danger with it sometimes is that people also, when we talk about masculine and feminine qualities, or the yin and the yang, is that there is a word very often used, like balance, which again then can become a too simplistic and narrow definition. Oh, I just have to balance my masculine and my feminine. That's then when I'm in a state of real harmony, which I don't ascribe to, because it is, first of all, there is no balance as a noun, as a such thingness. There is always a balancing, being in movement with. The same way when you stand, most people have the capacity to stand and not fall over immediately. So there is a balance. But at the same time, that process is a very active process. It's not a static phenomenon. So there is a balancing. And in health, again, it's the same way. Like if you look how life functions, is not the absence of viruses or diseases or challenging environments. It's the homeostasis of the system, knowing exactly how to have the right amount or deal with the challenges that come in all the time and that we carry within ourselves. And I remember one time doing an Ayurvedic retreat, and in the process, there's strong orientation to cleanse, like to release toxins. And then right after procedures and releases, they say you actually feel kind of like very light, but also not fully stable. And they said, yeah, because now you're too clean.
And then
And
you smoke a cigarette.
well, you don't have to smoke a cigarette. The stuff that will create the right balance will come quite naturally by the process of life until you're, I don't know what else you have to be to not have that happen. But I found it very beautiful, and in more holistic systems, you always appear that you need those kind of like toxins or challenges or antagonistic forces in order to create the real resilience. And they need each other. There is this interdependent dance that and we can, people listening, I mean, we can all reflect on the moments in life where we would just wish that person to go away, or that political party to disappear, or if that challenge wouldn't exist in life. This kind of understandable, but in its essence, not matured approach of life. If I just would not have that whatever or this person, then I could relax. But in truth, it's not really like this. And often the paradoxical thing is true that if we allow that really to be there, then either the situation changes, even the person might disappear from my life, or the situation just doesn't have the same emotional charge anymore. So again, if we integrated something, the kind of fight with it disappears, and then it's okay that people are the way people are.
Yeah. And what I would add here is what's been really valuable for me to understand is I can still have a preference towards something within a polarity. So it's like I don't push away one side of the polarity, but that does not mean that I equally choose both sides of the polarity. And I think that's a big misunderstanding that can come from certain spiritual teachings where basically what to me seems like the essence of everything is just love everything that arises, which is like, well, yeah, that's the basis. Otherwise, we are constantly sort of in this separation and fragmentation, but it doesn't stop there. Like I still have choice and agency from there to be like, yeah, and what is my choice within everything that's possible? And I can still, I don't like, I can choose to focus more on one side of the polarity and be like, this is what I'm orienting towards without pushing the other away. And I guess this is also part of what, when you talk about balance, that might be a misunderstanding there.
Yes, 100%.
And maybe one more piece there that I find
And then I just want to make a comment here quick, because that's so fundamental that again, that's why also I'm in other moments very passionate to talk about conflict, because that's exactly what it is. We need to wrestle with the things that irritate us, that we don't like, and so forth. And the solution is not like then a forced solution of like, I love everything just the same way and I abandon all my preferences and I'll just say yes to everything, which again, in parts of myself can be part of my practice. But again, if I make a practice just that.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you've been in a spiritual community or the spiritual bubbles or wherever, if people, you know, the people that don't really want to deal with stuff and just like, I will just love this and I will just be have equanimity. And you can set the clock, like if they're lucky sooner or maybe later, some kind of stuff will happen in their lives and they will break down or they will become suddenly super judgmental or rageful because they cannot contain it anymore, because the opposite energy that they need in life to become more full will want to storm into the room and say, wake up, this is
Yes.
just not the way it works. And then so it's and I like also the way when you said there's always a preference, and this does not mean that we abandon our preferences, not at
Yeah.
all. But the wrestling of like force and counterforce, thesis and antithesis, like we don't know actually what the synthesis is like, what's the transcendent state. It's not
Mm-hmm.
the same as like, okay, now we both sit in the room and we just allow everything to be here and like we just don't talk to each other, but we don't fight. That's not
Mm.
a synthesis.
Yes.
The state that emerges out of that is sometimes very simple, but can only come out of the fire of like these forces working through each other. And then something else is being born. It's a real transformation. It's not just
Yeah.
a, now I found a way to be good with it. But
Yes.
that can, if these are big things, they're very, very, yeah, they can demand a lot from us.
Yeah. And because you said something new can be born, for me, the image keeps coming up like this is the essence of creation is sex for me, is like the merging of opposites. And for me, that's a really powerful frame, because in that I can look at all these things from a place of pleasure and from a place of like it can be really pleasurable as well to be confronted with these different things, and to 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 surrender knowing what the outcome will be, and to really step into this dance of different forces. And yeah, I feel like that's how new things are born on all levels.
Yeah. And that's important again. That's why I'm also want to speak about this, like to kind of like resurrect the word polarity. I don't know if it's been really that, but it's my just a little observation that also in spiritual circles there's been a leaning towards something else a little bit.
Mm.
And that it's actually it's nice and it's fun to play with this kind of oppositional
Yeah.
forces in life. Like in sex, it's very clear, like, wow, you're so different. How interesting is that?
Yeah.
Until we come to the place of, oh, can you be a bit less different than me, please, and just be more like me?
Mm.
But that's it's also an eternal dance.
Mm-hmm.
And um, yeah, and again, maybe towards the later part of the conversation today, I want to also bring in how that I think, from my observation, affects us on a societal level or a political level. Because as you said before, I mean, I was a um, super identified left-leaning Green Party. You know, I mean, you can just take the list. um, Person that um, in the time that I grew up in, also at the end of the communism, where there was two antagonistic forces very strongly
Mm-hmm.
in the world, the capitalist idea and the communist idea. This is a simplification, but still there were two very different ways of looking at how do we build a good life for the
Yeah.
world, and horrible side effects, but they were kind of like there. And then when the collapse of the communist regimes came, it felt like also what some political scientists like Francis Fukuyama said, like that now we are in the end of times, like the end of history. And we felt like now the liberal democracy kind of orientation will just go on a straight line infinitely into future forever. And at one point we don't have to wrestle with those kind of things anymore.
Mm.
And it's talked a lot about now, and people can articulate this better than I do. But I was, through my upbringing and the time of being a young man and then going through life, this was the journey that I went along.
Mm.
And now I would say, and some people have articulated that, I think we were in a hybris. That was exactly what we're talking about here, where suddenly we felt we felt we won, and now the others understood we were right from the beginning, and now we can declare victory. We wouldn't have said it like this, but of course there was this inherent arrogance of like, now we're right, we know who's wrong, and now we can just go on indefinitely with this kind of approach, and we don't need to think about anything else, with the consequence that interestingly enough, the kind of socialist counterpart, the Western capitalism, that had to always like they also influenced each other. They were not just static phenomena either. They were also kind of like um, give and take a little bit of inspiration from each other. And when the socialist perspective fell away, the liberal democracies or the capitalisms became what we call now neoliberalism, or like hardcore capitalism. And then we are harvesting the negative side effects of that now since quite a while, where the socialist perspective suddenly was not anymore a force to be taken into account. So we kind of lost
Yeah.
the the outside challenge to our own ideas, and we kind of became arrogant and
Yes.
hubristic and feel like now everybody needs to swallow our medicine. And we did
Yeah.
that very violently, very arrogant in many kind of different ways. We meaning the West, or people with that leaning. And now we see, I think, just a very understandable, right now, I think, pretty unconscious backlash of that, of the forces which we didn't want to deal with suddenly coming in since a long time already. And they are represented by people that just make it very look like a strong counterpart, or turn into extremist perspectives
Yeah.
of that, because the other thing was not heard. I don't want to make an assessment of how it really was, but it makes sense for me that it goes like this. So I think we have something on the global stage here as a proof of that principle, that we
Mm-hmm.
need to always keep ourselves in check, see what are we orienting to. Is that something that integrates and holds more perspective? Is that something that where we unconsciously maybe exclude a lot?
Yeah.
And what is it that we don't want to happen? And how can we have a conscious relationship to that which I think I don't want to happen, and have it come along?
Yes. Yeah. And understanding that um, this this dance that we're talking about of polarities, the more unconscious it's happening, the more violent it will be, and um, the less it will feel like a dance, and the more it will feel like a war, like I think we're seeing now. But also to understand that does not have to be the case, and there are, for example, like I know we've talked about this off camera as well, that seeing what's not working right now in the like Western cultures can lead to this like, oh, everything is fucked that we've done, which to me feels far off the truth. And I think like what we're being asked to is just to create a deeper refinement that includes the other side, but where we're not just discarding everything, but where we're creating a better version of that. And I'm also thinking of, I think Thomas Huber uses this term, enlightened consumerism. Have you heard this of him?
Not sure.
So instead of just being like, oh, anything around consumerist culture is wrong, to be like, well, maybe we just need a more conscious way to be a consumer. and to understand the consequences of the things that we consume, but not to be like, well, we should all just live the most like simplest life and go back to some romanticized idea of how life looked like some time ago, but just to bring more consciousness into it. And I think then it can be much more this pleasurable dance and less this war and this jumpiness, this like, oh well, yesterday I thought this was the truth, and then today it's this. And maybe we can wrap up with this, because I remember that you wanted to talk about this as well, like the maybe it's a sort of archetype of the convert.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting place when we say we want to include consciously the dualities, the dialectical dimension of life, the polarity. It's actually a way to reduce the danger of extremism, which is kind of first paradoxical.
Yeah.
Well, shouldn't we avoid extremism by having a lot of opposition? But it's actually that's the other way around, and we see that we co-create in ourselves fanaticism, extremism, whatever you want to call it, like in ourselves or in families or in the world. We participate in the creation of it if we're too sure of ourselves, and
Yeah.
we don't leave some space to be challenged and allow otherness to really take place, even if especially if that costs us something. Then it's actually a very valuable place. If I feel like it touches on something, I have to give up of myself. Everybody who's been in a working relationship knows this is a fundamental principle. If your word is the only word that counts, you don't have a relationship, really.
Yeah.
Or not a conscious or not an eye to eye level relationship. You're, well, a
Or a very
well-meaning
kinky relationship.
dictator or benign tyrant or whatever, or just alone. And then that's the same conversation about freedom. You can be so free, but then you're totally you end up being in total isolation. So we either find the extreme form of that which we aspire to, freedom, great, and more autonomy, I have more space to move. But if I push it to the very extreme, I become totally isolated. And that's not something that we want to do. So we move from this conscious orientation if we don't take the opposite into account. Suddenly, in my model of mature and immature, masculine and feminine, for example, you can go to this strong orientation of freedom. But if I don't watch out, suddenly I might fall into this, push it too far without the tempering forces, the counterparts. I might fall into the very unconscious expression of that, which then is a very strong sense of isolation, loneliness, which again, a lot of men report about. They feel very, very, very lonely. And then, so I either become very lonely, or somehow life through other people or situations brings back the counterpart. And I face a partner that has a lot of dependency issues, and it irritates me, and I don't want that, and they should be more like me and whatever. Or I get very irritated about the people out there in the world that are like this. And so I'm dealing with it suddenly. And that doesn't feel like freedom in the sense of expanding peace. It's freedom with a lot of trade-offs, for example.
Yeah.
So there is a probably inevitable beauty to life that it will not let us pass through with this unexampled, unexamined, simplistic orientations of life, because it says no, that's not the way to hold more, to really create unity that can contain. I mean, you mentioned Thomas, my teacher, and he often said a beautiful phrase like peace is not the absence of conflict or violence. Peace is that everything is allowed to be here.
Yes.
And I think that's the movement. And again, even a phrase like this, again, sometimes you need to examine what you're making of this. If that
Yeah.
becomes your dogma again, your rigid orientation, or what
Yes.
does that really mean? And the mind has a very good way of getting lost in these things. And then it's again like in the work to learn to be embodied with orientations like this. It needs a lot of heart. It's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
my base.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. And we will always get a reflection of where we are with this, like a gentle or strong reflection of life.
The way I've been framing what we're talking about in the context of power and love, which is actually a framing that I've gotten a lot from you and gotten very inspired on, which could be one way to describe the polarity of masculine and feminine. And I had a podcast conversation recently where the person asked me about the balance between power and love. Like, oh, sometimes we're too much on one side. And I'm like, it's not how I look at it. It's not like one takes away from the other at a higher dimension of this. And the way I tried to explain it was to say, when we talk about power that is not connected to the heart, for me, it's a perversion of power. It's not true power. And when we talk of love that is void of power and agency, it's not real love. It's like something weird our mind has like fragmented. And so on these higher levels, and maybe that's also what you meant with this, I forgot how you phrased it, but these orientations where there is already a synthesis of these opposites where they already
Essential
include
states.
the essential states. Yeah, where they already include. And I think for me, that's helpful because I might have listened to this conversation that we're having in the past and sort of feel a bit dull by like, oh yeah, it's always a balance between different forces. And like there's something about this like coming to the center that would have landed in me not as something like super dynamic and juicy and alive, but kind of like, oh yeah, right. Like it's always a mix of different things and we always have to balance things.
Mm.
And that's so far away from how I experience this. There's so much aliveness in there and so much, there can be so much pleasure and joy in the meeting of those different forces.
Yeah. And again, that's cool because again, I appreciate when you share how one could have listened to this, or and some people might listen to it like this, that it then sounds like a keeping everything quiet and balanced, and like or just a big mix of soup, like just put everything there, pieces when everything is in the pot, and just like steer it on a slow flame. Again,
Yeah.
that's not it. It can be like this, but we don't know. But it's not a prescribed way of doing it. And um I'm a proponent of a path of, call it integration, where we work with that. And then you can say like, oh, but that becomes a little bit boring because you always see the other side. And but where's the kind of like, when I was a teenager or a young man, I had my much more like intensity seeking moments, or going into spiritual explorations, doing very long retreats. I was just not like tempering my fire. I was just going with my fire, and that had consequences also sometimes. And so in this, there is also a big place to say, yeah, and sometimes really play with the extremes. Like invite that in. It's not like, no, don't be extreme, don't be a fanatic. Well, sometimes we are. So like art, for example, or even skill, anything you do artful, even therapy or working with people, sometimes you also really dial up like big time on one of these dimensions,
Yeah.
or you push it to the very extreme and see what happens, to kind of like shock the comfort zone of people, to wake them up, and something else is being created. so that again is not in opposite to a path of integration. If there is a kind of like a conscious, more or less conscious or wakeful way of doing those things, this is wonderful. But if again, if we get identified with, but now it's like this forever and ever, well, we'll see how life answers. And the suffering that is created, as you said, about power and love is like, it's like always these kind of where we split unconsciously, we suffer if we notice it or not, but we will.
Yes. Cool. Any parting words around the webinar of how this ties into what you'll be talking about in the Art of Polarity webinar?
Yeah. So I would say, like in this conversation, we kind of like mapped out a bit more the philosophical, spiritual, maybe even societal landscape of where polarity is at play in life. But in the webinar, we will also very concretely look really at this, the polarity of yin and yang, the masculine and the feminine, in different names. But so we will make it very concrete. How does that operate in you as a man, as a woman, as a person maybe feeling you're binary, that all of this can be applied. So it's really not about pigeonholing or labeling people back into, but now you're a man and you got to be feeling, behaving, doing things like this. That's just not not what we're doing. Um, so we'll make it very concrete, but this what we talk today really is the base or the fundament of this, that this is not something isolated from the rest of life, but it's a particular lens through which you can approach yourself in life. But in doing so, you actually learn about the wider experience of life a lot. And yeah, I'm really looking forward, because this is something that I've been working with since a very long time, and it keeps fascinating me deeply. And I'll hope I'll be able to kind of like renew the juice in it and bring some freshness to it.
Nice, cool. So I'm hearing that it will be very experiential and people will get like an embodied experience of how that lives in you and how you can apply it to your life.
Yes. And it will not tell you what to do and what to feel, but just give you a, yeah, gift that you will learn the tool to apply it to yourself.
Cool. Well, we'll put the link to the webinar somewhere around this video and podcast for people to check it out. If you're watching this close to the release, you can join us live. If you're watching it later on and there's a link, you can probably catch the replay. So yeah, do check it out. Gregor, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, David. That was fun.
Yes.
And fresh.
Oh yeah. Talk soon.
Thank you.